Welcome back to another episode in a year of Final Fantasy. And you know what? This isn't just any episode. This is episode 30. 30, that's 3 tens of episodes. Anyway, we're still in the month of Leviathan, and today we're going to continue with our Summons series. Last time we talked a little bit about summoners themselves, but today we're going to get into the real meat of the class, the summons, the beasts, the summons that they actually summon, not necessarily just the classes. So let's get into those elemental creatures that we love so much. So today we're going to get into the 3 most well-known summons, Ifrit, Shiva, and Ramuh. And I've really been wanting to do a video like this for a really long time. For those that don't know, it's actually why I created this Crystarium network, to kind of just go over all the different kinds of role-playing stuff in a bunch of different ways. And today I get to do that because we're going to take a look at these 3 summons as they pertain to the Final Fantasy franchise as a whole, and we'll see where we can pinpoint, if we can do that, their origins in real-world culture. So let's start off with Ifrit. Ifrit's a classic summon featured in pretty much every single game that features summons. He's been depicted in many different ways. Generally though, he looks like a beast with horns. He also has been, known to drift into the demonic-looking type of character, but Ifrit, at least these days, he's kind of known just as a beast with horns. Ifrit's signature attack is known as Hellfire, which usually deals, as you might expect, fire elemental damage to all opponents. In many games, he's one of the very first summons you get, and Ifrit, along with the other 2 we're going to be talking about, is pretty much by far the quintessential elemental summons that all the fans of the franchise know, or at least they should know. There is, however, an exception to the appears in all games, and it's actually one that we're going to see recurring here, and that's Final Fantasy XII. He's actually replaced by another summon known as Belias. Other than that oddity though, he's pretty much made his appearance everywhere else in the franchise. So Ifrit, pretty standard beast, sometimes demon of fire. So where does that even come from? As far as real-world culture goes, Ifrit can be traced back to Middle Eastern lore. Actually, this one was a really easy one to talk about. So Ifrit, or you may see him as Ifrit, are a subclass of Jinn, which you may know as Genie. The Ifrits are definitely documented in mythology, and they have a pretty complex hierarchical structure of society. And in reference specifically to the Islamic religion, they are the greatest of the genies or jinns, and they're depicted as pretty dangerous. In the greater whole of Middle Eastern mythology though, they're not necessarily evil or good, they're just really, really powerful supernatural beings, among pretty much all accounts. And because this is my video, I'll just go ahead and inform you of my favorite forms of these summons. Ifrit, my favorite form is probably going to come from Final Fantasy 15 actually, and that's not necessarily just how he looks, but it's also how he acts and how he has actually influenced pretty much the entirety of the story of that game, which is really cool. I wish they would have gone a little bit more in depth with that, but Final Fantasy 15 Ifrit definitely takes the cake for me. So next, let's talk about Shiva, often paired up with Ifrit, usually boasting some kind of animosity between the 2, if the summons have any kind of personality in the particular game you're playing. It hasn't happened a lot, but it's happened a few times, and that's really fun to see their interactions. Shiva is usually depicted as an ice goddess of some kind, usually scantily clad. She appears in all of the games except yet again with Final Fantasy XII, though she does appear in 12 Revenant Wings, which was on the DS, I believe. So she does exist in the universe. Anyway, her signature move is Diamond Dust, which, again, like Ifrit's, it deals ice elemental damage. Ifrit's does fire, she does ice, to all foes on the battlefield. Now, talking about real world is a little bit harder in this instance than it was with Ifrit. So Shiva in real world culture originates as a Hindu goddess. However, the origins from Hinduism to the ice goddess are extremely convoluted. Like I said, much more than Ifrit's translation. Shiva is known as the god of creation and destruction and regeneration, amongst a ton of others. And this isn't intended to be some kind of exhaustive rundown of how Shiva fits into the different religious pantheons of the different sects of Hinduism. In fact, probably anything I've said about Hinduism thus far is probably wrong, but from what I understand, there are just a ton of different facets of Shiva. So how Shiva's morphed from the amorphous omni-god of Hinduism to the ice goddess we know today, pretty much there's only a few guesses that you can take, and from what I've seen, nobody really knows, except I guess from the people that work on Final Fantasy. But as she is explained in Hinduism, it's clear that Shiva is similar only in name, because in Hinduism, she is actually a he. But the many forms Shiva takes, I mean, she could be a he or he could be a she. It's pretty much all toss up in the air. I mean, we're talking about one of the most powerful gods in a religious pantheon, so anything pretty much goes. I've seen other people put forth the argument that it could be a play on words like shiver to Shiva. That's, you know, I wouldn't put something like that past them. There's also a theory I saw out there that Shiva may be modeled after a goddess of fertility known as Ziva, Z-I-V-A, and that's in Slavic cultures. I guess relating her appearance in Final Fantasy being an attractive woman, that could be some kind of connection there. Of course, it could just be an amalgamation of all of these. Whatever the case is, or whichever one's true, Shiva's just an awesome summon, pretty much in all of the games. My favorite form of her is easily her appearance in Final Fantasy XIV. She actually takes place on a pretty large stage with the story. If we're going to talk about proper summon animations, I guess I'll go with Final Fantasy X with that, because that snap at the end, that's so good. Love it. Last, we get to Ramuh, or again, if you're in Final Fantasy 15, Rama. I have absolutely no idea why they decided to go with that particular pronunciation of the game, because it's always been Ramuh, even in games like Final Fantasy 14, so I don't know, maybe a crazy dialect or something. Anyway, Ramuh is, of course, one of the most well-known summons in the series, and he is personally my favorite summon, just of all time. I'm kind of an electricity, lightning, thunder, elemental, I don't know, fanboy, I guess, for lack of a better word. Don't know why, I don't know, I like it. Anyway, Ramuh is sometimes known as Indra, I guess before they settled on that name. He hasn't necessarily been as much of a mainstay as our first two entries. He got bumped from Final Fantasy 8 and 10, and again, Final Fantasy XII, but like Shiva, he does appear in Revenant Wings, so he's appeared in slightly less of the games, but still, whenever you think of a lightning summon, you're probably going to think of Ramuh. So in the games, he normally appears as an old man with a large staff, usually molded into some kind of lightning bolt or something. His signature attack is Judgment Bolt, where the electricity roars out chaotically around the fields, dealing lightning elemental damage to everyone. Of the three summons, like I said, Ramuh is my favorite. So as far as his real-world origins go, they are, well, sadly, they're like Shiva's. They're incredibly hard to pinpoint the exact genesis of this particular character. Like Shiva, it seems that he originates from Hinduism and is a form of the god Vishnu. There's some different poems that you can read, very old poems that mention Ramuh. And there are rumblings that it could be an offshoot of an ancient Mesopotamian god known as Lamu, which is a valid guess, I guess. But Lamu, I think we've seen those in Final Fantasy games in general. So with that, I might be inclined to have a little more evidence before I'm convinced of that one. Another idea that's been put forth is that in Atlantis, you know, the very old Atlantis sinking legends, there was a character called Rama, that's R-A-M-U, and he used ancient high-tech weapons, and sometimes that's associated with electricity. It's really hard to pin these things down. Again, it could be a similar situation with Shiva, where it's just got all these different characters, the Ramuh and Rama, and just all of these, and just kind of put them in a blender and out popped the thing that we have in Final Fantasy. So as far as my favorite Ramuh summon is concerned, that's absolutely a no-brainer in this case. It's Final Fantasy 15 easily. None of them even come close. When I first saw that summon, I was floored. I'd never seen anything so, I guess the best word would be casually epic in a Final Fantasy game before. That bass that explodes when his staff hits the ground, that is so freaking satisfying. So, that'll do it for today. I'd like to know what your favorite versions of these particular summons are. Leave those in the comments down below. Next time on A Year of Final Fantasy, we're still in the month of Leviathan, and we'll be shifting away from the game lore for a bit, and we're going to put a spotlight on Yoshitaka Amano, the wonderfully eclectic artist for the Final Fantasy series. If you enjoy my work, I'd love it if you'd subscribe, share my stuff around. Of course, if you don't, no hard feelings. I appreciate you sticking around either way. And go ahead and check out our Crystal Keep Chronicles, which is a live play D&D game that we're gearing up for that's heavily based off of my own classical Final Fantasy longings, let's say, and in this crazy world that I've made up. But otherwise, until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming.